I bid you a very, very warm welcome to today's show. In this particular part of the series, we are looking at what is contained in chapter 18. And because it's the final chapter of the Gita, Sister Denise was of the opinion that we should go through it shloka by shloka so that you, the viewer, can obtain the message and the depth and the wisdom that is contained in one of India's most ancient scriptures. So thank you so much for joining us. Sister Denise, I think we said goodbye to you the last episode on, or rather at, verse 22. So I now want to take up what is contained in verse 23. It reads as follows: that action which is ordained and free from attachment, performed without desire or hate, with no wish to obtain fruit, is said to be sattvic. And then there is a description in verses 24 and 25 respectively of what it means to perform Rajasic as well as Tamasic actions. We and the viewer know that this has already been discussed in the previous chapters, and it is re-emphasized here. So would you tell us the significance of the emphasis as well as the significance of the words in these three verses?
Yeah, there's one thing I would like to draw our attention to in 23. You see, it says action which is ordained, free from attachment, performed without desire or hate. That means that the really pure action is motiveless. This expression sattvic corresponds almost to like life which is choreographed. It has been said about India that life is like a ritual. And I think that there is some very subtle meaning behind that, if you want to perform absolutely perfect action, you're just in that action for the sake of that action, okay, in remembrance of God. It's a very, very different kind of motivation than what we would be used to working with in Western countries. And I think when we move over to 24, we look at the Rajasic action, that corresponds actually to the Western way of doing things. But I think that here God is asking us to go to this very, very pure stage, which of course is not so easy, not so normal by any means, but it contains something very important for us.
I see, Sister Denise, that in the description on what action means that is Rajasic, the words to obtain desires with selfishness or with much effort comes up, whereas when Tamasic action is spoken of, mention is made of delusion, disregarding consequences, loss or injury to others as well as one's own ability. So not only is this mentioned again, there's greater detail given. It's as if there's more doors opening so that we could see and measure our conduct against this yardstick to see where we fit in. And it's obviously very important for the reader to know this, isn't it?
If something comes easily to you without hard effort, it's much easier to be detached than if you really work really hard for it. And then it's taken away or something, you're really distressed by that. So it's very interesting to see the description of these three. Looking at verse 25, the Tamasic, you know, if you look at the world today, so much action is operated in this way, absolutely not concerned about other people, very selfish, even harmful for the self. And I think it's very good for all of us to study these sattva, rajasic and tamasic descriptions of action, because we really need to be aware how we may be sabotaging ourselves, and really be careful about that, because the consequences are quite dire.
Yeah, they are quite dire. I would now like to take the view to verse 26, which again goes into the description of Sattvic, Rajasic and Tamasic respectively. Verse 26 reads, "Released from attachment, free from ego, endowed with steadfastness and resolution, unperturbed in success or failure, such a doer is said to be Sattvic." Now, Sister Denise, unperturbed in success or failure, that is a very high stage to be in, because a handful on the planet could be put into this category, because we're all vacillate and do this when we're faced with success or failure, because we don't look at our actions and say, I didn't succeed in this. You think, I am a success or I am a failure. We personalize it. And then the impression that I get from this is that stay uncontaminated by life. Don't let life harm you or contaminate you.
Definitely. And the other thing that I think is interesting is the second line of the stanza, in which God says, endowed with steadfastness and resolution. So on the one hand, you have to be very overtly resolved, determined, so there's energy going into it, and at the same time absolutely equal in success and failure. These next three standards bring in the idea of the will, determination, and so on, which is quite an interesting added dimension to the discussion of the qualities of action.
Again, Rajasic is described as follows: passionate, desiring the fruits of action, greedy, violent-natured, impure, subject to joy or sorrow, such a doer is proclaimed to be Rajasic. Now, Sister Denise, subject to joy or sorrow. I didn't realize there was anyone on the planet who's not subject to joy or sorrow.
I think almost everybody is operating in this Rajasic way and defining Rajasic as good, Tamasic, okay, bad, but nobody goes to the Sattvic. So it's quite interesting that we've got Rajasic in the middle as opposed to one end of the spectrum.
You defined the word passionate earlier, but in this context, explain to me why passionate is wrong. The reason I'm asking this is because, well, in the reality in the world I grew up in, passion was a great thing. What is your passion? Is a question that's frequently asked in the West. What do you feel passionate about? Where does your interest lie? Where are your ambitions? Because your passion actually takes you to where you want to go. It brings you success. Okay, so passion in most cultures is revered. Somebody without passion is considered to be half alive.
That's right. And this is why I'm saying that what is described here as Rajasic, in Western culture in particular, we would call that, there's one who has a zest for life. In Brahma Kumaris, we talk about soul consciousness, action consciousness, and body consciousness as three levels. And here, clearly, we're looking at action consciousness. And I think, especially in the West, we do consider action consciousness to be the, correct end of the spectrum. And we really very rarely go to the passionless, the introspective, the quiet. That, I think, is a bit off the radar, So for us to look at Rajasic as middle, and then to look at Sattvic as something to be desired, is really, I would say, a bit of a culture shift.
A bit of a culture shift. What is more concerning to me is what is contained in verse 28, which reads as follows: undisciplined, vulgar, obstinate, wicked, deceitful, lazy, despondent and procrastinating. Such a doer is said to be tamasic. Now, Sister Denise, never mind all the others, procrastinating. We all have this in our character to some extent or the other. I suppose if one has to look at these 26, 27, 28 and give yourself percentages, we'll score highly in Rajasic and Tamasin, and as far as Sattvic is concerned, it'll be this much. So we find ourselves in the position of being exactly what God says we shouldn't be.
That's why He's talking to us.
Right, so He's saying to us, rise, my child, rise.
He is.
Get
he
up,
is.
wake up, fight.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Get up and fight.
So the fight then is against our own weaknesses.
It is. Well, it's the inner war. But then we have to be proactive in the outside world as well, because we can't be despondent. You know, if you look at the adjectives here in 28, I don't think we would say, okay, no, I'm undisciplined. We may not be totally disciplined, but I don't think we would say we're vulgar. I don't think we would call ourselves wicked and deceitful. We may be a little bit lazy.
Yeah. Just going to say, I can't give myself a 0 in that, yeah.
But I think, you know, there's a big difference between being firm and determined, the good, and then obstinate, the bad version, stubborn. So, I mean, you can see that in all of us we do have a little bit of all of it, and God is saying move as close as possible to the Sattvic, and because this is what's going to take you to the next level, which is letting go of everything. You see, because action consciousness, or the Rajasic form of action, is still keeping us firmly plugged into the world of action. And I think the Gita is preparing us for letting go and leaving everything. And I don't think we can go directly from being very involved, very passionate, and then all of a sudden gone. Doesn't go so easily.
No, it doesn't. I would now like to take the viewer to verse 29. And Sister Denise, what I find interesting about this is that for the first time in the entire book, we hear about the threefold distinctions of the intellect. The intellect, that is news to me. It reads as follows: and also of firmness according to the qualities taught completely and separately, Arjuna. The intellect, verse 30, the intellect which knows when to act and when not to act, what is to be done and what is not to be done, what is to be feared and what is not to be feared, along with the knowledge of bondage and liberation, Arjuna is Sattvic. Sister Denise, I think my mind goes to a trainee surgeon friend of mine who once said that in her first year of her internship, she learned how to cut, but then it took a lifetime to learn when not to cut.
Interesting.
Isn't it? Yeah. So that principle of do no harm came in. That's what came to mind when I heard the second line, when to act and when not to act. One has to be very in tune with oneself and with the external to be able to pull this off, isn't it? Because it's sometimes it involves a split-second decision.
Very often it's a split-second decision, and this is why I think one has to be Sattvic, because in Sattvic stage you're very internalized and you have an intuitive feeling. Do, don't do, be still, come into action, let go. It's very much connected with being so deeply internalized and internally balanced, and there you're really acting in yoga. This is what we try to do.
Verse 31 reads, that intellect which distinguishes incorrectly. Okay, so the power of discrimination that you mentioned earlier appears to be lost here, between the right and the wrong, and between that which is to be done and that which is not to be done is Rajasic, Arjuna.
Here I think you see the people who act impulsively coming under this category. People who feel something very strongly, then they will justify that it's wrong, but they won't be able to be drawn in and really dispassionate and impartial. So you can see there's quite a big difference in that. And I think it's almost easier for us, especially in the Western world, to look at the Sattvic intellect and compare it with the Rajasic and Tamasic intellect, because I think we operate very much on the basis of logic, clarity. Everything has to fit and be coherent and consistent, and we don't leave things up to intuition. But of course, with the Sattvic intellect, your intellect and your mind will be in tune with each other, so the intuition will work for you.
32 caught my attention quite a lot, and the more I read it, the more I wondered what is meant by what is contained in the second line. That intellect which enveloped in darkness imagines wrong to be right. I mean, hello, how scary is that? And all things to be perverted is tamasic, Arjuna. Sister Denise, such a person is very clearly, in the eyes of God, well, and in reality, a danger to himself and to others.
Well, this is where you shift over towards criminality. You see, because if you imagine wrong to be right, you're convincing yourself that this action that I'm doing is right, but anyone else, it would be totally wrong. So that you're operating in a very strange way and in a very demoniacal way, I would say. So we have to be very careful about this. The person is not able to think straight, coherently, consistently in terms of being considerate of other people and bearing in mind the context and so on. The person is totally enclosed within their own logic, which may be really off track.
I see the aspect that is taken up next in the next 3 stanzas is self-control and self-reliance, but more self-control. I'd like you to explain your take on it. Viewers, we are now at verse 33. The unswerving firmness by which through yoga one holds fast the functions of the mind, vital breath and senses, that firmness, Arjuna, is sattvic. This stanza takes me back to the first scene of the Gita, where we meet Arjuna and Sri Krishna in the chariot, but God is holding the reins. So we see that image of control.
Well, I think, to me, I would read this word firmness, which in the Sanskrit is dridata, as referring to the will. And the will is a very important part of spiritual practice. To give an added dimension, a person who is addicted is unable to operate according to their will, because addiction is very often described as a disease of the will, so that you may wish to do something but you can't. So here the will is being shown that according to your will, if you say, I intend to, I plan to, I decide to do this, you do it. That is the sattvic one. But you're not holding yourself by force, but it's a very pure kind of firmness that you're keeping everything in order. And this, I think, is a very useful concept for us to think about, to meditate on, and to try to cultivate within ourselves, because this kind of firmness corresponds to being a disciplined person, that you can apply your will whenever you decide to, and what you wish to do, what you choose to do, that will happen.
Yes, so Denise, I would now like to go to verse 34, which reads, but the firmness by which one holds to duty, pleasures and wealth, with attachment and desire for the fruits of action, that firmness, Arjuna, is Rajasic. It's the wrong kind of grasp. That which you're holding on to is not good for you.
Yeah, I mean, you say, this is my duty and I'm going to do it. There's a kind of obstinacy that comes into it. And I have a right to this pleasure, so I'm not going to listen to anyone who says, well, this pleasure may be not good for you. Holding on to your wealth, you become miserly. You say, this is mine, you see, and so you can see how this Rajasic form of firmness is pushing you towards the vices, pushing you towards not so good kind of character. You're away from generosity of spirit, for example.
Verse 35, Sister Denise, that firmness by which a stupid man does not abandon sleep, fear, grief, depression and conceit is tamasic, Arjuna. Sister Denise, this encapsulate 99% of the planet. And my question to you, as far as verse 35 is concerned, do we choose to be fearful, full of grief, depressed, conceited, and even to some extent stupid?
I think this is why I mentioned that it's to do with the will. I mean, where your will is weak, you will say, I'm depressed. If the will is strong, maybe a depressive feeling will come up and you'll stop it right there and say, you know, no, I choose to go beyond this arising feeling of depression, and you control it, and you send it back down again, as it were.
And that's not suppressing, is it?
Well,
you choose not to buy, the subconscious sells you a negative feeling, and you say, I'm not buying.
Exactly.
Sister Denise, that's big.
It's Raj Yoga.
But it's still big.
Yes.
It's big because no one teaches you this stuff at school. You just happen to switch on a television, watch Raj Yoga TV and learn it when you're 53. I mean, so what I mean is, I don't understand why this is not taught universally. I mean, not necessarily the Bhagavad Gita, but what you are saying is universally true.
Yes.
How to be. We're not taught this, which is a tragedy.
It is a tragedy, and I think this is really what is motivating you and I to sit together and discuss these things publicly, because the idea is that these are so important, so useful, so extraordinary, that definitely is part of education for life, you know, and even if you learn it at 53, it's going to be useful for your next few years. You know? Okay,
never too late to learn. I feel sorry for this person described in verse 35, Sister Denise, because who among us hasn't found ourselves with this? I mean, fear is universal, grief universal. The other qualities contained there as well. We all have a bit of it.
Well, you see, if you look at the wording, the firmness by which he doesn't address his fear, his grief, his, you know, depression and conceit and so on. You see, he's obstinate. He's saying, I'm depressed, there's nothing I can do about it. That's not true. Okay, you're feeling depressed, you have options.
So he's become passive.
Well, he's become actively passive, if you can say.
Okay, that is a topic for another episode, what it means to be actively passive.
But you see, he's called a stupid man. That means he's not intelligent. He's not applying his possibility of having options. He's just saying, you know, this is my situation and that's that, and I'm not budging from coming under its influence. That's a real stupid kind of obstinacy, you see. And then you have all the excuses in the world for being less than, and God is saying, wake up.
I still feel sorry for him, Sister Denise, because this describes everybody, okay? But we'll chat about how we can help this poor person in verse 35 in the next episode, Okay, because I think it's worth discussing further. I'd like to share with you, the viewer, now that we are at the end of this particular episode, discussing chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita. If you find yourself with any of the negative qualities that is contained under the definition of Rajasic and Tamasic, please do not feel as if you're the only one on the planet who is this way, who feels this way. Of all the negative qualities mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, every single one of us has them, and the only question is, to what degree? The reason Sister Denise and I are here in the studio, the reason for the existence of the Bhagavad Gita, is to help us become a better person in time. And the question is, are you willing to put in the work? Sister Denise, I really want to thank you for sharing what you did today. I think it has opened the eyes of many people. Okay, so thank you so much for that. And there you go, brothers and sisters. I hope that you were able to learn something today, and from the previous chapters as well. I hope you were able to grasp the full depth and meaning that is contained in the Bhagavad Gita, and realize that it is a scripture that you can use to your advantage in your life right here and right now. So thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope to see you again for the next episode. Goodbye, and please take care of yourself.